Stacey Castor.
Here across from me again and tell me that you're not a killer?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
To the outside world, Stacey Castor was a loving wife, a hardworking mother, and a woman who had suffered unimaginable loss, twice. But behind closed doors, she was hiding something so cold, so calculating, that it would leave the entire country stunned. In 2005, her second husband, David Castor, was found dead in their home near Syracuse, New York. A glass of green liquid was near the bed. A suicide note sat beside it. It looked like a tragic case of self-inflicted death, until the truth started leaking through. Police noticed David's fingerprints weren't on the glass. The note was typed, not handwritten, and the toxicology report revealed something chilling. Ethylene glycol poisoning, better known as antifreeze. That same sweet-tasting but deadly substance was at the center of another death, one that had been long buried. Michael Wallace, Stacey's first husband, had died suddenly in 2000. At the time, doctors thought it was a heart attack. But after David's suspicious death, investigators exhumed Michael's body and found traces of antifreeze preserved in his tissues. What they uncovered next was something even darker. To cover her tracks, Stacey Castor tried to frame her own daughter, Ashley, for both murders. She allegedly typed a suicide note on the family computer, a chilling confession from Ashley that claimed responsibility for the deaths of both men. Then she crushed pills into Ashley's drink and waited. When her daughter slipped into unconsciousness, Stacey called 911. Doctors saved Ashley's life, but the betrayal was irreversible. When questioned, Ashley denied writing the note and had an airtight alibi. She was at school during the time it was typed. Police traced the file back to Stacey's computer, and the entire web of lies collapsed. In 2009, Stacey Castor was convicted of murdering David, attempting to murder Ashley, and fabricating evidence in one of the most disturbing domestic crimes in recent history. The press dubbed her the Black Widow and the Antifreeze Killer, but there was no glamour in what she did. These were not crimes of passion. They were slow, agonizing executions carried out in her own home. Stacey was sentenced to 51 years to life. She never admitted guilt. She never apologized. In 2016, she died in prison of natural causes, taking her motives to the grave. But the scars she left behind remain. Ashley, once nearly killed by her own mother, survived, but not without trauma that will likely last a lifetime. She didn't just poison her husband's, she poisoned trust. She poisoned her own bloodline, and she did it all with a smile that said, "It wasn't me." To Genene Jones. In a place meant to heal, she became a silent executioner. Genene Jones was a licensed vocational nurse working in pediatric wards across Texas during the 1980s. Parents trusted her. Doctors praised her attentiveness. But beneath the surface was a twisted need for control, one that would leave dozens of infants dead or permanently damaged. Jones worked at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio, where a spike in infant deaths raised suspicions. Babies who were stable suddenly crashed with no explanation. Some were revived, others never opened their eyes again. The pattern was chilling, but the evidence at the time was thin. Instead of launching a full investigation, the hospital quietly asked her to resign. Genene Jones moved on to a small pediatric clinic in Kerrville. But the deaths didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. One victim, 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan, went into sudden cardiac arrest after Jones administered an injection. The child died within minutes. An autopsy later revealed lethal levels of succinylcholine, a drug used to paralyze muscles, including the heart. The only person with access to it was Jones. In 1984, Genene was convicted of murder in Chelsea's case and injury to another child. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But Texas law at the time allowed good behavior early release, and Jones was scheduled for parole in 2018, until prosecutors filed 5 new murder charges to prevent her from ever walking free. Facing overwhelming evidence and decades of silence breaking open, Genene Jones pleaded guilty in 2020 to killing at least one more child and was handed a life sentence. Her motive? Prosecutors believe she deliberately induced medical crises so she could save the children and appear as a hero. When she failed, they died. She created the emergencies she was praised for responding to. But no one applauds her anymore. She's been called one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. medical history. A woman whose hands were meant to heal, but who instead turned hospitals into hunting grounds. She is now serving life behind bars, where no child will ever come near her again. She didn't poison out of hate, she poisoned out of ego. And in the end, her need to be seen as a savior made her something else entirely. A killer in scrubs. 3. Marie Hilley. To her neighbors in Anniston, Alabama, Marie Hilley seemed like a picture-perfect Southern wife. Elegant, polite, and devoted to her family. But behind that smile was a master manipulator whose crimes would span decades and states, ending in one of the most bizarre true crime stories ever told. In 1975, Marie's husband Frank Hilley suddenly fell ill. Doctors were puzzled. He suffered from unexplained nausea, fevers, and organ failure. He died not long after, and Marie walked away with a life insurance payout. Just a few years later, her teenage daughter Carol began experiencing eerily similar symptoms: hair loss, numbness, muscle spasms. At first, no one thought to connect the dots, until Carol barely survived a mysterious poisoning. Tests revealed massive levels of arsenic in Carol's system. That's when investigators exhumed Frank's body. The cause of death? Arsenic poisoning. And the only person with both access and motive was Marie. Charged with attempted murder and murder, Marie was arrested, but before she could stand trial, she vanished. For years, she used aliases and fake identities to travel across the country, posing as different women. She even faked her own death and returned under a new name, this time pretending to be her own fictional twin sister, Terry Martin. She remarried, started a new life, and almost got away with it. But the truth finally caught up to her in 1982 when police arrested her in Vermont. She was returned to Alabama, convicted, and sentenced to life plus 20 years. But Marie had one final twist. In 1987, during a brief furlough from prison to visit her new husband, she escaped. For 4 cold, rainy days, she was missing. She was eventually found unconscious in a backyard from exposure. She died soon after in the hospital, this time for real. Marie Hilley's story isn't just about poisoning. It's about illusion, greed, and deception so deep that she was willing to poison her own child to keep her secrets hidden. A woman who turned trust into a weapon, a mother who wore charm like a mask, and used arsenic like ink in her deadly story. 4. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano was charming, intelligent, and always composed. But behind the Southern grace was a woman the media would later nickname the Black Widow. A woman whose deadly pattern left a trail of bodies, insurance payouts, and unanswered questions. Her crimes began in 1971 when her husband, James Goodyear, a U.S. Air Force sergeant, died after a mysterious illness. Doctors suspected natural causes. Judy collected the life insurance and moved on. Just a few years later, her boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris, died under similar suspicious circumstances in Colorado. Again, no one connected the dots until much later. But her most shocking act came in 1980, when her own son, Michael, who had recently become paraplegic after an alleged mysterious illness, died in a canoe accident. Judy claimed it was a tragic mishap, until investigators discovered that Michael had been heavily weighted with braces and dumbbells when he drowned. What linked these deaths wasn't just tragedy, it was profit. Each victim had an insurance policy with Judy as the beneficiary. Her entire pattern was one of manipulation, poison, and calculated removal. When police finally reopened James Goodyear's case, his exhumed body revealed high levels of arsenic. The same was suspected in Bobby Joe's case. The quiet Southern widow had left a chemical fingerprint wherever she went. In 1983, Judy's luck ran out. She was arrested after trying to kill yet another fiancé with poisoned capsules and a car bomb. Her web of crimes began to unravel. In court, prosecutors painted a chilling portrait, not a grieving wife or mother, but a predator in plain sight. She was convicted of multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. In 1998, after 14 years on death row, Judy Buenoano was executed in the electric chair, the first woman executed in Florida in over a century. Her story reads like a novel, a series of husbands, boyfriends, and even a child, all dying under suspicious circumstances. But this wasn't fiction. It was the reality of one woman who treated love like a transaction and death like a solution. A black widow whose web grew darker with each kill, until justice finally caught her in its grip. 5. Deneen Peterson. Deneen Peterson ran what many parents believed was a safe, nurturing home daycare in Oklahoma. She was trusted, soft-spoken, and surrounded by children every day. But in 2006, a terrifying truth emerged, one that turned her daycare into the center of a criminal investigation. It began when several toddlers started exhibiting strange symptoms: excessive sleepiness, vomiting, and in some cases, near unconsciousness. At first, doctors thought it might be a virus, but as more children fell ill, and always during Peterson's care hours, suspicions grew. Toxicology reports revealed an alarming discovery: traces of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, in their systems. Some of the levels were dangerously high. Investigators soon zeroed in on Peterson. They uncovered that she'd been drugging the children in her care with over-the-counter antihistamines, not for treatment, but to make them sleep longer, behave quietly, and be easier to manage. She wasn't trying to kill, but the method was reckless, negligent, and potentially fatal. Authorities described her actions as a shocking betrayal of trust. These weren't random victims. They were babies and toddlers entrusted to her by working parents who believed she would protect them. Instead, she used them for convenience, sedating them so she wouldn't have to deal with their normal behavior. In 2007, Deneen Peterson was convicted of multiple counts of child endangerment and assault. The courtroom heard harrowing testimony from medical experts and devastated parents. While no child died, prosecutors argued that death could have easily occurred. Some children had been given enough diphenhydramine to severely depress their respiratory systems. Peterson was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The judge didn't mince words. You turned a place of safety into a house of harm. For many, her case marked one of the most disturbing breaches of trust in Oklahoma's child care history. She didn't use poison for murder, but for control. And in doing so, she crossed a line no caregiver ever should. The damage wasn't only physical, it was emotional, societal, and deeply personal. One mother later said, "I thought I was dropping my daughter off at a daycare. I didn't know I was handing her over to a chemical prison." 6. Diane Staudte.
I didn't want another one to die in the house.
And why is that?
Because houses are nasty after somebody's died in it.
Diane Staudte was a church-going mother of 5, living in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri. To outsiders, the Staudtes were an average American family, tight-knit, spiritual, and musically gifted. But behind the stained-glass smiles and piano recitals, Diane was quietly crafting one of the most disturbing family poison plots in recent U.S. history. It began in April 2012 when her husband, Mark Staudte, suddenly died. The cause was listed as natural, organ failure due to prior health issues. Just months later, her 26-year-old son, Sean, also died under mysterious circumstances. Again, there was no autopsy, and the family buried him quickly. But when Diane's daughter, Sarah, fell gravely ill not long after, the hospital noticed a disturbing pattern. Doctors found massive levels of ethylene glycol, antifreeze, in Sarah's system. This time, authorities were called. What followed was a chilling confession. Diane had been slowly poisoning her family, one by one, by lacing their drinks with antifreeze. Her motive? She said her husband was lazy, her son was annoying, and her daughter was difficult. She wanted peace, and murder seemed like the easiest way to achieve it. But Diane didn't act alone. Her other daughter, Rachel, just 22 at the time, was in on it. The two plotted the poisonings together, using internet searches to determine dosage and effectiveness. Their online history revealed searches like antifreeze poisoning symptoms and how to make it look like natural causes. Sarah survived, but with permanent brain damage. And when the full story came to light, it horrified the nation. A mother, intentionally eliminating the people she was supposed to love and protect. A daughter, complicit in murdering her own family members. In 2015, Diane pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault. She received life without the possibility of parole. Rachel took a plea deal and was sentenced to 42.5 years in prison. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was slow, deliberate, and cruel. And perhaps the most haunting part is how long it went unnoticed. How close Diane came to erasing her entire family and walking away clean. One detective said they weren't just poisoned, they were erased from her life, like an inconvenience. And in the aftermath, Missouri was left grappling with the unthinkable. A mother who used poison not for money or revenge, but for silence. 7. Kimberly Clark Saenz.
That a so-called angel of mercy turn angel of death.
Kimberly Clark Saenz was supposed to save lives. As a licensed practical nurse at the DeVita Dialysis Clinic in Lufkin, Texas, her role was to care for some of the most vulnerable patients, those dependent on dialysis to survive. But in 2008, a wave of sudden medical emergencies swept through the clinic, leaving staff and families horrified. And at the center of it all was Saenz. Patients who had been stable were now collapsing mid-treatment. Some suffered cardiac arrest. Others gasped for breath and never recovered. Paramedics were called again and again. Within a single month, 5 patients died, and dozens more had close calls. Something was very wrong. The clinic launched an internal review, and what they found was chilling. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and patient logs began to point to a single nurse, Kimberly Saenz. Investigators discovered that she had been injecting bleach into patients' dialysis lines. Bleach, one of the most accessible and deadly substances in a medical setting, was used to clean equipment, not human veins, but Saenz had weaponized it. The motive was as senseless as the crime itself. Some speculated it was a power trip. Others believed it was an attempt to cover up poor job performance by causing chaos. Saenz had a history of disciplinary issues, including drug abuse and erratic behavior on the job. Still, no one imagined she could be capable of murder, until it was too late. What made the case even more disturbing was her demeanor. Kimberly denied everything, even as witness after witness recounted seeing her near the bleach, with syringes, moments before patients went into distress. One technician told the court, "We all started to notice the pattern. If Kimberly was on shift, someone went down." In 2012, after a dramatic trial, Kimberly Clark Saenz was convicted of capital murder for killing 5 patients and aggravated assault against 5 others. She was sentenced to death. Today, she sits on death row in Texas, one of the rare nurses in U.S. history to face execution for crimes committed in a medical facility. Her case became a national reminder of how trust in caregivers can be shattered, and how a place meant for healing can become a hunting ground in the hands of the wrong person. The families of her victims still struggle with the unthinkable. They brought their loved ones to the clinic to stay alive, and they never came home. 8. Martha Ann Johnson. On the surface, Martha Ann Johnson seemed like a grieving mother struck by unimaginable misfortune. From 1977 to 1982, 4 of her young children died mysteriously, each death explained away as sudden illness or tragic accidents. Sympathy poured in. But behind the veil of sorrow, there was a pattern, one too chilling to ignore. Martha lived in Georgia and had been married multiple times. Each relationship was fraught with instability, fights, and tension over her children. But what no one knew was that she had turned motherhood into murder. And her children, just babies and toddlers, were the victims. Her youngest, 3-month-old Jennifer, was the first to die. The cause? Sudden infant death syndrome, they said. Then came James, 3 years old, who supposedly suffered a seizure and choked on his bedding. Years later, 2-year-old Melissa would also die suddenly in her crib. Each time Martha seemed heartbroken, and each time doctors and authorities accepted her explanation. But when 11-year-old Earl, the oldest child, was found dead under similar mysterious circumstances, investigators finally asked a question that had been ignored for too long. How could so many children from the same mother die so tragically, so suddenly? The truth unraveled in 1989, when Martha's surviving child bravely came forward. In chilling detail, he recounted moments that revealed his mother's sinister patterns. Forensic reviews reopened all 4 cases. The final diagnosis? The children had been smothered to death. One had also been given a fatal dose of poison. Martha was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. In 1990, she was convicted of killing 11-year-old Earl, and although the earlier deaths couldn't be tried due to lack of direct evidence, the pattern was undeniable. Her motive? Cold and calculated. She had killed her children to punish her husband during their marital disputes, seeking revenge through the most horrific act imaginable. Martha Ann Johnson was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. To this day, she remains one of the most disturbing examples of maternal filicide in American history. Her case shattered the comforting belief that a mother's love is unconditional, and forced investigators and the public alike to confront the possibility that sometimes the greatest danger comes from the one person a child should be able to trust completely. They didn't use knives or guns. They didn't leave blood at a crime scene, but their method was just as deadly, sometimes even more so. These women used something silent, something slow, something that could hide in a coffee mug, a juice box, or a child's IV drip. Poison. In the stories we've just explored, poison wasn't just a substance. It was a weapon of control, a tool of revenge, a way to eliminate a partner, a child, or anyone standing in the way, without leaving a mark, at least not at first. But as time passed, the patterns became impossible to ignore. And behind the tears and tragic explanations, investigators found something far more disturbing. Intent. Some of these women wore white lab coats, some wore church dresses, some baked cookies for neighbors. But beneath the surface was calculation, coldness, a willingness to watch others suffer, sometimes their own flesh and blood, just to get what they wanted. It's easy to believe evil has a face, but these cases remind us, sometimes it wears a smile, sometimes it wears scrubs, and sometimes it's the last person you'd ever suspect. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think twice, don't let it vanish in the scroll. Like, comment, share, and hit subscribe for more true crime stories where trust is broken and justice finally speaks.